Chapter 1. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Battle of the Gods. Battle of the Gods ends. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, all members of the Guild of Light, listen up. Take down McCrae. All members of the Guild of Darkness, listen up. Take down McCrae. All members of the Seal Guild, listen up. Take down McCrae. All members of the Sapphire Guild, listen up. Kill McCrae. Black Shattered Valley. The rarely seen land was extremely lively at the moment. The areas within a few kilometers were occupied by various people from different places, among them countless powerful people who have gathered together. Of the four big guilds were people of different paths, and they arrived one after another, with even the god of war present. They had all gone there for the one singular purpose. The Battle of the Gods. The impact of the battle this time was vast. Apart from the four big guilds that were usually roaming the world, there were also many more solo players who were quite involved with the event as well. And the one who received the most attention was the god of war, McCrae. Die, McCrae, you won't be able to escape today. Suddenly, a figure standing halfway up the mountain had a fierce expression on his face. He roared violently. Upon seeing that familiar face and the astonishing aura that erupted, everyone's eyes lit up with surprise. They had clearly recognized this person's identity. It was none other than the president of the Seal Guild. McCrae, how dare you take on the Demon King boss for yourself? Today, our four big guilds promise you this, God of War. You shall fall. At the very top of the black shattered valley stood a firm figure. There was no change in emotion on his hard face, only that fierce gaze revealing the anger within his heart. Four big guilds. Looking at the numerous strong figures in front of him, McCrae frowned. He did not expect the usually arrogant and independent four big guilds to actually join forces to deal with him. Although he was confident in his strength, he also felt extremely pressured facing the siege of this many strong opponents. But as a god of war, it was impossible for him to admit defeat just like that. In the next moment, looking at the few figures in front of him, McCrae's eyes had a profound look to him. He directly snorted and said, "Why the nonsense? Fight me if that's what you want." At the foot of the mountain, countless players were watching. The four big guilds are usually in constant conflicts. Why are they joining forces today? Yes. And they only joined forces to deal with one person. Humph, why don't you guys take a look at who they're facing? McCrae is the publicly acknowledged #1 battle power war god in the divine realm. Although the battle power of McCrae the god of war is unparalleled, he has never joined any forces, right? Today, the four big guilds came prepared, bringing all the elite experts. Damn, even the great god McCrae will have a hard time with this many powerful enemies. Just as everyone was discussing, the battle between the four big guilds and McCrae broke out in one instant. Suddenly, everyone felt the whole black shattered valley shake. Suddenly, an astonishing energy wave erupted. The scorching light produced by the energy wave seemed to be a second sun in everyone's eyes. Boom! 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 After a loud sound, the dust landed on the ground. The entire black shattered valley was directly cut in half by the violent collision of energy. How powerful were the four great guilds? They were an overwhelming force that dominated the entire divine realm, and apart from controlling most resources, they even had many experts under them. McCrae was known as the god of war, and so it was true that he was powerful. On the other hand, on the side of the big guilds, their president's personal strength was inferior to McCrae. But they had the advantage in numbers. Facing the joint attack of hundreds and thousands of experts, even the god of war was helpless. He was instantly surrounded and attacked. This battle was one that shook the skies. Together with the black shattered valley, under the joint efforts of many experts, it was inevitable that many would still perish. After an unknown amount of time, The smoke dispersed, and the battle finally came to an end. The four great guilds paid a painful price, and countless experts died, losing half of their previous strength. But most importantly, the god of war, Mage, had fallen just like that. It was a pity. After an unknown period of time, in a rental house in Linhai City, a handsome young man struggled to open his eyes. It was Mage. This is Mage, who had just woken up, kept having many memory fragments flash across his mind. The huge amount of information gave him a splitting headache. Mage rubbed his temples with great effort to clear his head a little. Mage stood up and looked at the slightly tender face in the mirror, becoming even more confused. What was going on? Didn't I get ambushed by the four big guilds and die in a sea of enemies? Mage still vaguely remembered the feeling he had when his health bar was emptied. It was the despair of his life withering. Mage pinched himself hard. He felt pain. He wasn't hallucinating or dreaming. Could it be that everything that happened to him in the divine realm was just a dream? Why were both memories so real? Which was a dream and which was real? Mage looked around suspiciously. The dripping water tap, the window with the broken curtains, the bathroom with a nauseating smell, everything gave him a familiar unfamiliar feeling. Wasn't this his rental house from years ago? Memories were like a movie, slowly playing in his mind. The piercing sunlight passed through the broken curtains and shot straight into Mage's eyes. This dazzling sunlight made him narrow his eyes tightly, though it was also this piercing light that gave him an incomparably real feeling. I'm still alive. Mage spread his pale hands and scratched his head. His memory became completely clear. Am I reborn? Could everything really start over? With a hint of nervousness and surprise, Mage slowly pulled open the curtains. The hot sunlight told him that this wasn't a dream, but a real world. Mage thought he was dead, but he didn't expect God to play a joke on him and let him be reborn. After accepting reality, Mage's eyes were no longer confused, but was instead replaced by an indescribable determination and indifference. After a simple wash, Mage changed his clothes and decided to go out to take a look. Just as he finished packing and was about to go out, his gaze suddenly landed on the announcement in front of the computer screen, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Announcement. The server, Divine Domain, is officially opened at 12 o'clock today. Welcome to the Global Player Trial. Chapter 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rebirth. First day of the opening of Divine Domain. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, Divine Domain. The server opens today. Even Mage, who had an unusually strong mind, couldn't help but clench his fists at this moment. It was only when his nails dug into his palms that the sharp pain allowed my Ru to snap out of it. There were only two reasons why the man who was known as the god of war in his previous life was so shocked. Divine Domain. I've been reborn to the first day of the opening of the Divine Domain. Mage touched the stubble that had just appeared, and for a moment, thoughts surged in his mind. Other people might not know what the word Divine Domain meant in the next 10 years, but Mage, who was reborn, clearly knew the weight of these two words. Divine Domain. A phenomenal virtual reality online game that appeared out of nowhere in 2090. Thinking back, at the start of the server, the number of people online at the same time around the world had reached nearly 3 billion. Half a month after the game opened, almost everyone in the world was a Divine Domain player. A perfect world system, a perfect physical engine, perfect professional skills, and even a perfect AI NPC. All this made the game, the online milestone in the history of human games, completely connected with reality. And the year after the opening of Divine Domain, the ultra-high commercial return rate also made many investors in the world flock to it like ducks. They all entered the Divine Domain with large sums of money. The Divine Domain had become the second world of humans. But these weren't the most important things. In the 5th year of the opening of the Divine Domain, after all humans had registered to log into the Divine Domain server, an unknown force interfered. Reality and the world of the Divine Domain had become one. The original laws of the universe were replaced by the laws of Divine Domain. All humans became the game characters that they registered in Divine Domain, and it officially became the real world. History called this year, first year of Divine Domain. As for McCrae, he was already an existence that stood at the top of all the players in the world when Divine Domain became reality. He was the strongest god of war, and was revered by all the players in the world. Because he refused to join any forces, he traveled alone and was regarded by many solo players as their idol. The memories of his previous life flashed past McCrae's mind like an old photo album. In the end, it stopped at the moment when he was surrounded and killed by the 4 big guilds. 4 big guilds. McCrae murmured softly, then clenched his fists, his eyes revealing a coldness that would chill anyone's heart. Then, McCrae shook his head. His tightly furrowed brows relaxed, and was replaced by a slight smile and a trembling body. After McCrae was reborn, he not only had memories of the schemes of the 4 big guilds in his mind, but even memories of the countless hidden missions, hidden bosses, and even many of the unique missions in his previous life. In his previous life, even an ordinary hidden mission would make countless players drool, let alone a hidden wild boss or a limited unique mission. These missions and bosses usually didn't just give simple attributes enhancements on the interface, but also special props, special skills, and even basic attribute points that could affect the growth of characters. There was a saying in the Divine Domain. Hidden missions and rewards from bosses may not be the best, but the best rewards can only come from hidden missions and bosses. At this moment, in McCrae's mind, there was already a rough outline. He was thinking of a series of training and strengthening plans from level 0 to max, as well as missions that he should take on, treasure chests that he should open, hidden NPCs that he should meet, and so on. Wouldn't it be a good thing to start from scratch? As that story about the man who lost his horse goes, good luck may come out of bad luck. The god of war in this lifetime would definitely be stronger and more terrifying than the god of war in his previous life. Divine Domain, I'm coming. Having made up his mind, McCrae didn't think too much anymore and opened the Celestial Domain's client directly. Looking at the extremely familiar loading animation, a trace of reminiscence appeared in McCrae's eyes. Game initializing, player information scan, uploading data. After a crisp system prompt, the scene changed. System. Welcome to the Divine Domain. Hello, respected adventurer, welcome to the Divine Domain. I'm your navigation sprite, Xiao AI. Next, I'll explain in detail the player classes. Divine Domain to you. Relying on its ethereal voice and sweet appearance, the navigation sprite had captured the hearts of countless nerds in his previous life, and was known as the #1 killer of nerds. At this moment, Maroi didn't have the mood to listen to Xiao AI talk about these things that he was already familiar with. McCrae stared at her game character, stunned. Chapter 3 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Max level account for all classes. Translator. Atlas Studios editor. Atlas Studios, was he hallucinating? McCrae couldn't help but rub his eyes. This is. The game character in front of McCrae was the invincible god of war from his previous life. McCrae still couldn't believe it. He opened the character's characteristic panel directly. Player. McCrae, class. Full. Time mastery, unique, hidden, Beov, level 80, maximum. The information of the character that came into view shocked McCrae. This was the invincible god of war account that McCrae had in his previous life. For a moment, all kinds of thoughts rushed into McCrae's mind. Why did he get to keep the account of Divine Domain after his rebirth? And just like in his previous life, he was proficient in all professions and had maxed level. Looking at the game character in front of him who was already indistinguishable from him, Maroi's right hand actually trembled slightly. On the first day of the server launch, it was directly maxed out. What did this mean? This meant that he no longer needed to bury himself in farming monsters day and night for the shocking amount of experience points, nor did he need to do some meaningless experience farming missions. There was only one thing he had to do. He just needed to find those special items, and with peace of mind. Just think about it, when players around the world were still bitterly killing monsters for their levels, he only needed to rely on the memories of his previous life. He'd be able to collect the equipment from back then, and even the unique equipment that he desired but didn't get in his previous life. This was simply like he was hacking the game. At the thought of this, McCrae couldn't help but feel excited. At the same time, an idea quickly surfaced in his mind. The unique restricted skill book. The unique restricted title. The unique limitation. Making himself the god of war with a full set of unique equipment, that was his goal. What was worth mentioning was, if it was just max level, it wouldn't have moved McCrae so much. The most important thing was that he retained the fact that he wasn't limited by his class. Proficiency in all occupations. This was where McCrae's true confidence came from in his previous life. It was precisely with this advantage that he could rely on himself alone, single-handedly and not joining any forces. This was what allowed him to turn into the root cause of the one and only publicly acknowledged invincible war god, step by step. In fact, in the divine domain, players' occupations were roughly divided into 4 categories: warrior, archer, mage, and cleric. And every big category would have a variety of occupations. Overall, the warrior, archer, and magic classes were all damage output classes, and only the cleric could have support skills. The choice of occupation was unique. Anyone could only choose one occupation to change into. After changing class, only equipment tools and skills that could be used by the occupation could be used. But there was only one exception in the entire divine domain, and that was the god of war McCrae. In his previous life, McCrae triggered the only inheritance of the ancient god of war during a mission by chance. It could break through the restrictions of a single occupation and change occupations. By relying on the unique legacy of the ancient god of war, McCrae broke divine domain's iron law that a player could only change occupations to another one. When he encountered a high-defense warrior, he directly used a magical occupation to counter it. When he met a magic-element opponent, he could use the bandit skill of the warrior-element to assassinate him. From this point of view, he could be said to be an invincible presence in 1.1 battles. After rebirth, McCrae had already given up hope on restoring his proficiency in all occupations in his previous life, because the conditions for triggering that mission were simply abnormal. Even he couldn't guarantee that he could trigger it again and complete it perfectly. On the day that the divine domain had just opened, his account had already reached max level and retained the heaven-defying attributes of being proficient in all classes. How could McCrae not be shocked? For a moment, McCrae fell into deep thought again. This sudden surprise broke his initial plan to start from scratch. McCrae could feel the sharpness in his eyes as he regained control of his game account. In the early stages of the opening of the divine domain, some large investments had yet to completely enter the server. And the so-called 4 great guilds were also established a year after the opening of divine domain. The various large financial groups were envious of the commercial value in the divine domain, so they invested heavily in the funds and carried out guild construction in the game. Rather than calling it the 4 big guilds, it was more like the 4 big financial groups. In his previous life, McCrae chose to roam divine domain alone. Later on, when the game world became a reality, he suffered a lot at the hands of the 4 big guilds. In the end, he helplessly died in the traps by those very guilds as well. If I were to fall by the hands of the 4 great guilds just like this, then so be it. But since you've given me another chance, McCrae was expressionless. He snorted coldly, his eyes sharp. God of War McCrae would definitely take revenge. But then again, McCrae knew his current situation very well. There was no point in blindly hating. Besides, Divine Domain had yet to fuse with the real world, and the four big guilds were only a group of players at the moment. So McCrae didn't dwell on it. Taking advantage of this period of time to quickly improve his strength, plundering more resources and rewards was the main mission. A moment later. Having made up his mind, Maroi didn't hesitate anymore. He directly chose to log into the game and started a new journey. Chapter 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Forest of Eternity Dungeon. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, Honorable Adventurer, your character has been established. You will be transported to Beginner Village 777. I wish you a happy adventure. The scene changed. Then, McCrae was sent to the entrance of the Beginner Village. Dressed in a worn beginner's cloth shirt without any attributes, there wasn't much difference between its figure and appearance and the real McCrae. After all, it was a character created after scanning the player's body data. Newbie Village, I really miss it. McCrae looked at the simple village behind him and muttered. At this point, there were already a large number of newbie players at the starting point of the newbie village. Some wandered around to admire the scenery, some tried to talk to beautiful NPCs, some moved their hands and feet to familiarize themselves with the system, and some opened the chat channel to call for friends. All of their faces were filled with curiosity about the world of Divine Domain. Seeing this, McCrae smiled slightly. Weren't they like himself back then? Divine Domain was the world's first simulation game of the surreal physical engine. It was said to be a game that could replicate the real world 100%. This game wasn't just about increasing one's battle power. Players could choose to become life or battle players according to their own wishes. For example, the famous treasure hunter in his previous life who didn't level up but only opened treasure chests. There was also the hot-tempered mining buddy from the Purgatory Mine with a shovel in his hand, and the gourmet cook who had no choice but to steal Dragon Island's gourmet egg from Dragon Island to cook. There is nothing in the Divine Domain that you can't do, only things that you can't think of. Looking at these types, McCrae, he shook his head. With strength, all these could be owned, but without strength, the life players would be enslaved by the battle players sooner or later. In the early stages of the game, every second was very precious. McCrae walked quickly towards the entrance of the newbie village. The camera switched, and had already appeared at the village entrance. People came and went at the village entrance, it was very lively. A wild boar's tusk that was just picked up from the wild boar forest. It's definitely a rare item. And it costs 2 bronze coins. A middle-aged man wearing linen clothes waved a damaged tusk and shouted with all his might. Are you still troubled over the lack of weapons? Only need 3 bronze coins to buy the best level .0 whiteboard dagger, a must-have for fighting monsters. Every newbie who had just registered a character and entered the game would have 20 copper coins in their backpack as starting capital. Give me one. Give me one too. McCrae didn't have any thoughts about this level .0 whiteboard weapon. It was very difficult to accumulate money in the early stage of the Divine Domain. Money was spent where it should be spent. If he walked any further, they would be in an unsafe area. At the entrance of the safe area, players of 2 to 3 levels were everywhere, either trading items or looking for teams. The surging crowd made the originally spacious road seem a little crowded. The few small dungeons that newbies could go to were still relatively difficult. Compared to ordinary wild maps, the equipment in these few dungeons not only had a higher drop rate, their attributes were also slightly better than those dropped in wild maps. Many small teams would stay in these small dungeons in the early stage. Those who did were able to get a pretty good newbie set. The more famous ones were the Fire Chaser set and the Silver Guard set. These sets were enough to deal with the attributes requirement of the first 10 levels of ordinary players. Wild Boar Forest Requesting Group, 1 looking for 3, Warrior, with newbie shield. Please party up for Tree Demon Forest. Magic damage 28 fire. Elemental mage, guaranteed reliable damage. Awesome, 28 magic damage. I'm only 16. Come on, our team just happens to lack a strong DPS. Big boss, bring me along. Sorry, we're full. That person could only leave sadly. Similar conversations like these happened all the time in this place. McCrae, who had been alone for many years, recalled his ignorant appearance when he first stepped into divine domain in his previous life. At that moment, his incomparably hard heart, which had long been polished by the impermanence of the world, actually felt a little warmth at this moment. But McCrae was still not prepared to stop. He had a place to go. Then put on the beginner's cloth hat and quickly walked forward. Hey, friend in front, what's your class? We're preparing to enter the adventure. Level Eternal Forest dungeon. We're still short of one person to join the team. Are you interested? No, McCrae wanted to refuse, but a distant memory of the Forest of Eternity suddenly appeared. Alright, I'm a support. Type. McCrae took a look at the members of this team and replied calmly. Support class. Huh, that's great, we just happen to lack a support teammate. Everyone's here. Come on in. The person shouting was the team leader of this temporary team, Bill. An agility battle class. Thief. How are we going to split the items after fighting the boss? Looking at the person in front of him, McCrae wasn't in a hurry to join the team, so he asked casually. Man, we're not even fighting the monsters and you're already thinking of dividing the equipment. I'll lure the monsters in front and kill the monsters. All you need to do is to help me block the main position. If I get the big one, you get the small one, Bill said somewhat proudly. Chapter 5. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Forest of Eternity Dungeon. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, alright. McCrae replied noncommittally. On the first day of the game, this inexperienced newbie wanted to clear the adventure. Level Eternal Forest dungeon. What a joke. Ordinary. Level Eternal Forest wasn't something a team like theirs could clear, let alone an adventure. Level 1. In his previous life, only professional gaming teams managed to clear the adventure. Level Eternal Forest dungeon on the third day. Although they were in the same dungeon, McCrae understood that adventure. Level monsters had 30% more health than ordinary ones. This meant there was a much higher requirement on the defensive ability of the front row warriors, the damage output ability of the back row, and the healing ability of the support. A careless mistake, and it could lead to team annihilation. While McCrae himself could rely on her level advantage and technical skills to crush the early stage of the dungeon. Due to the characteristics of the dungeon, he needed to form a team to enter. He could only add a wild team that was destined to be wiped except himself. And McCrae's final goal was a special equipment that only the boss of the Forest of Eternity above adventure level would drop. The Chain of the Deceiver, unique. The Chain of the Deceiver was a bronze. Level necklace, but it was a very useful little tool. The attributes it added weren't high, but as a unique tool, it had an extremely special attribute. It could change the appearance of the carrier, and change the appearance of the carrier into that of any player or NPC that it had come into contact with within 3 days. It lasted for 5 minutes, and during the disguise period, it couldn't be detected. To McCrae, this bronze. Level equipment, the Chain of the Deceiver, was even more important than gold. Level equipment. If he had this Chain of the Deceiver, his thoughts would be open to even more options. Many plans that could only be implemented in the mid-game could be carried out in advance now. That's good. Hurry up and enter the team to prepare for the dungeon. Seeing that no one raised any objections, Bill hurriedly urged them to get going. After McCrae entered the team, the 5-man party immediately entered the Eternal Forest dungeon. The Forest of Eternity was originally where the goblins lived. But after a battle with the Undying Army, it was tainted by the blood of the undead and gradually lost its former vitality, becoming a dark forest filled with the aura of decay. The monsters in the Forest of Eternity were known for their cunning and scheming. The goblins who were sent to clean up the filth were in the eternal forest that was decaying all day long. In the end, they couldn't resist the temptation of the dark power and degenerated into a dark creature. From the moment they entered the map of the Forest of Eternity, the light became dim. The air was filled with the smell of decay. A cold wind blew past. Apart from McCrae, the team instinctively pulled back their necks. "Captain, this map is too realistic. Why do I feel that it's a little scary?" Simon, who was holding a beginner's short sword, said to Bill behind him with a stutter. His slightly trembling right hand made people wonder if he could still swing the novice short sword in his hand when he encountered monsters. "Isn't it just a game, what's there to be afraid of?" Bill, who was also a little scared, looked at the expressionless McCrae who was looking around and said forcefully with disdain. McCrae looked around, enjoying this rare moment of relaxation. He conveniently released the lowest level beginner skill of the light support class. Illumination. Then, a dim yellow light ball the size of a head appeared above the heads of the team. "What the F***ck, I've never yearned for light as much as I do now." McCrae could completely understand the feelings of these newbie players. The map environment of the Divine Domain was pretty realistic, after all. The Forest of Eternity in front of them was just a normal dark element dungeon map contaminated by the Undying Spirit. When they reached the mid-game, all kinds of exquisite, large-scale open-ended maps that had been designed would truly shock the hearts of people. The sinister and terrifying ghost-sifting peak, the snow-covered East Valley, another vibrant valley of the thorny rain forest, and the vast and endless Great Tiger Spot Desert Hill. So much so that there was even a special group in the Divine Domain, an adventure sightseeing group. Of course, none of this had happened just yet. The difficulty of the Forest of Eternity wasn't particularly high. The only hard part was the numerous traps set by the gnomes in the forest. For example, pits or cold arrows. In the Forest of Eternity dungeon above the adventure level, the final boss, Grull, would also possess a talent skill. Earthbind. And at this stage, the levels of the support classes were just too low. There were no skills like Purification, which led to the many dungeon teams being wiped out dozens of times by this skill in his previous life. It wasn't until later that a team specializing in challenging the same boss over and over discovered a special way to avoid the restrictions of the earth binding. Only then, after many team wipes, did they manage to finish the mission. McCrae looked at the class allocation of his teammates. Simon, Warrior; Berser, Knight; Bill, Bandit; Meng Chi, Warrior. All of them were DPS. Chapter 6. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dark Goblin. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, geez, have the three of you ever played games? Is there a need to be so scared? Bill inadvertently glanced at McCrae, who had released the illumination spell as he talked to the people behind him. His words put an embarrassed smile on the other three in the team, except McCrae. Warrior Simon scratched his head in embarrassment and said, "Isn't this just the start of the game? I feel that this game is a little different from the ones I used to play. I'm still not very good at it." He spoke for everyone with that comment. Standing beside Simon, Berser said in a muffled voice, "Me too, I feel a little uncomfortable." Looking at the embarrassed two, Meng Chi, who was standing at the back, didn't say anything, but nodded in agreement. "It's all right, aren't they just a few cute little goblins? I'm going to lure the monsters now. Just listen to my commands later. Attack whoever I tell you to. Don't mess up the attack frequency. Protect the support well. You're in charge of healing, so just use your skills on whoever loses their HP, surely everything would be fine." Bill changed his previously disdainful expression and seriously assigned tasks to the team. "Nice, Captain. All right, I'll do whatever you ask me to do." Simon nodded without any hesitation. Meng-Chi and Ursa also leaned towards each other and made protective gestures. I'm going. Bill nodded in satisfaction, then released his ability Stealth. 3 idiots, you're too easy. No one can even get past the normal level Eternal Forest, and you still want to clear Adventurer level. Dream on. Just be my free cannon fodder like you're meant to. A mist flashed on Bill's face, and his body quickly became transparent. He disappeared from the spot. Stealth was one of the most basic and legendary skills for bandits. An amazing bandit is required to have very outstanding control over the skill Stealth. Stealth could allow the thief player to enter a completely transparent invisibility skill, though it still had a physical body. Footsteps could be heard when walking as well. Bandit Stealth move could reduce the probability of monsters discovering them. In Divine Domain, the aggro mechanism of different monsters was based on an aggro number. Once the players entered the monster's recognition range, the system would produce random numbers periodically. Once the player's numbers exceeded the monster's aggro threshold, he would be discovered by the monster. The higher the level of the bandit stealth move, the higher the aggro threshold of the monster. If a bandit had a level 50 advancement, when facing ordinary level 50 monsters, the bandit would approach from behind. As long as the bandit didn't overlap and touch the monster would never discover the bandit. When a team was exploring a dungeon, a successful bandit could scout the terrain of the dungeon, the distribution of monsters, and so on in advance. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the investigation of bandits could increase the team's survival rate by more than 50%. Bill's stealth didn't seem like something a newbie player could do, however. He even knew how to use shadows to enhance the effect of stealth. But in McRae's opinion, Bill's stealth was simply full of loopholes. He could barely be considered a newbie high-level player, and was on a completely different level from himself. In the dark forest, cold wind blew from time to time. A special feeling appeared in McRae's heart. We've been targeted. This was the sixth sense of danger that McRae had developed from traveling the world alone in his previous life. He sharply looked towards the shadows in the distance. It was a dark goblin. These cunning monsters that hid in the dark all day long could not be discovered at all without strong perception. McRae looked at Bill, who easily dodged the dark goblin with stealth and continued stealth, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. The game just launched, and he's able to do this much. This little thief is a little interesting. However, all of this is useless. Even if they avoid most of the monsters, with their purely physical close combat class, they won't be able to kill the boss Deceiver Gruel, no matter what. Our captain is pretty good, he even went to lure the monsters himself. Simon held his short sword and said seriously. That's right, that's right. The last time I joined another team, they kicked me directly because I didn't know how to play. Ursa's face was filled with indignation. Captain is a good captain, but this dungeon is too scary. Damn dungeon. Meng-Chi grumbled and kicked away a vine by the roadside. Don't move. McRae suddenly shouted at Meng-Chi, but it was too late. The vines that were kicked were like agile pythons, quickly wrapping around Meng-Chi's feet. Help! Meng-Chi kept letting out sharp screams. His whole body was already hung in mid-air by the vines. It's a vine trap. Prepare for battle. Trigger the trap, and the goblins will appear soon. Simon, Ursa, stand in front and raise your shields. Meng-Chi, cut off the vines immediately. McRae commanded calmly, and conveniently cast an illumination spell on the back of the big tree that hung Meng-Chi. Upon hearing this, Simon and Ursa didn't doubt him at all. They held their swords in their left hands and shields in their right, protecting and Meng-Chi behind them. Oh no! The aggro range of the two dark goblins that he had dodged was already triggered by the trap alarm, and Bill's low-level stealth was clearly not enough to help him. The goblins, who had discovered Bill, immediately brandished their fangs and wooden clubs and attacked him. You bunch of trash! Chapter 7. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bill's Thoughts. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios Chapter 7. Bill's Thoughts. Forget it, I can't care so much anymore. Since you're in such a hurry to die, I'll send you on your way. I wonder what these small monsters can drop for me. Having made up his mind, Bill immediately deactivated stealth and rushed towards McCrae and the other three with the temporary acceleration effect. Quick, assemble the formation. Bill shouted at Meng Chi and the others who had already cut off the vines. At the same time, the dark goblins activated by the trap alarm moved out one after another. Immediately, 3 pairs of horrifying green eyes appeared in the dark forest. Before they could react, 3 dark goblins had already leaped out of the forest. With the enhancement of part of the undead army's abilities, the dark goblin's agility was much higher than ordinary goblins, and its damage was also much higher. The leading goblin was slightly tall, probably the regular elite monster in the dungeon, the goblin captain. The goblin captain bent over and let out a horrifying roar at Simon, who was standing at the front. Its sharp claws opened, and with another leap, it directly used its hind claws to kick the shield-wielding Ursa down. Damage as high as 48 points immediately floated above Ursa's head. This was even with the damage reduction from the Knight Shield. For someone with only 150 HP, that was quite a lot. Quick! If you don't want to be wiped out now, hurry up. Attack. Summon all your skills on it. Focus fire on this goblin captain. You guys attract fire from the front. I'll sneak an attack from the back. Bill looked at the 3 dark goblins who were eyeing them covetously and shouted. Then, he immediately entered stealth mode. His body quickly turned transparent and disappeared. My luck is pretty good. I thought that killing 2 ordinary goblins would be the end. I didn't expect this group of fools to actually attract the goblin captain. This should be good stuff. Of course, why would Bill, who was already in stealth mode, go around the back? He directly hid on a tree far away and looked at the 4 people surrounded by goblins with a sinister smile. These 4 idiots should be able to finish off this team leader, right? Bill's stealth skills could fool Simon and the other 2, but he was still far from being able to dodge McRae's eyes. You want us to be laborers and perish together with these 3 gnomes before coming down to pick up equipment. Interesting. McCrae instantly understood Bill's little scheme, but he wasn't angry. In fact, he found it a little funny. Then I'll play with you. McCrae's smile faded, and he raised his hand to release an elementary healing spell on the injured Ursa. A light green halo with fluorescent light instantly appeared on Ursa's body, slowly recovering its health. Knight, stand up. Use parry. Cut off the goblin captain's position. 2 warriors, use challenge roar. Each of you taunts an ordinary goblin. McCrae commanded calmly. The panicked Simon and the other 2 didn't doubt him at all. Ursa, who had recovered to full health, held a wooden shield in his hand. He got up from the ground and rushed towards the goblin captain. Bang! Ursa raised his shield high and used a parry skill to block the goblin captain's next claw attack. Seeing that the elite monster was blocked, Simon and Meng Chi were no longer nervous. They both drew their beginner sword from their waists. His face turned red. Roar! Roar! The amazing skill of an early-game warrior to pull monsters. Challenge roar. A mocking red symbol immediately floated above the heads of the 2 goblins who were about to attack McCrae. The 2 of them successfully pulled the goblins aggro. Half of a knight's life is given by the shield. When parrying, the strength doesn't have to be fierce, but it has to be steady, synced with the monster's attack frequency. No matter what happens, don't lean forward. Keep your center of gravity at the back. Glanced at Ursa, who was about to face the goblin captain's attack again, and said calmly. This newbie warrior was pretty lucky just now. The timing of his parry was just right. Otherwise, this team leader's attack might have broken through his defense. When Ursa heard that, he immediately adjusted his defensive posture and stared intently at the goblin captain's front claws. Now! McCrae shouted. Ursa immediately took half a step back with his right foot, raised his shield from left to right, and stepped forward. Bang! After a dull sound, the goblin captain's claw was stopped again. In actuality, apart from this goblin captain, the other two ordinary dark goblins were easy to deal with. Bill, who was hiding in the tree, couldn't believe it. Under the command of this priest, the few good .4.nothings who were temporarily put together and even kicked out of their old teams were actually able to withstand the siege of the three adventure.level monsters. He had personally experienced the terror of this dark goblin captain. The damage value was ridiculously high. A fragile job like Bandit would almost certainly die after 2 tries. Seeing that the 2 ordinary dark goblins had died under the consumption of the 4 of them, and that the remaining goblin captain was already holding on bitterly. How could Bill still hide? If he didn't act, how would he get his share of the equipment dropped later? Bill, who was hidden in the darkness, glanced at McCrae, who was calmly commanding. Maintaining his stealth mode, he leaped down the tree, took out a sharp novice dagger from his pocket, and quickly touched the back of the goblin captain. You couldn't stand it anymore after all. After hearing Bill's footsteps, McCrae laughed softly. Chapter 8 You are listening at novelfull.audio. New equipment. Black Iron Gauntlets. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, brothers, hold on. I'm coming. Bill, who had sneaked behind the goblin captain, took the opportunity and shouted. He deactivated stealth and leaped up. With both hands holding the beginner's dagger with a green glow, it accurately cut the back of the goblin captain's neck, whose HP was already at rock bottom. Poochie, the moment the short dagger slashed across the goblin captain, a pungent black blood sprayed out from the back of the goblin captain's neck. The monster fell to the ground. Huff, looking at the 3 monster corpses lying on the ground, Ursa, who was still in a defensive posture, breathed heavily. Plop, because Simon and Meng Chi had expended too much energy, they directly slumped onto the ground. After a short rest, the 3 hurriedly ran towards the corpse, squatted down, and started to search the corpse. Bill, who was standing at the side, looked at the 3 people touching the corpses and said disdainfully, "It's just a low-level elite dungeon monster, what's there to search for? At most, I'll drop a few bronze coins for you. Are you expecting it to drop equipment? Let's split the bronze coins evenly and leave. We're still far from the boss." Before Bill finished speaking, Simon, who was searching the corpse, shouted excitedly, "Equipment is out. Damn! It's actually a black iron tool. Black steel. Grade wrist guard. Black iron equipment dropped on the first day of the server." Bill, who was originally leisurely polishing his short dagger, immediately put away his weapon and snatched the wrist guard from Simon's hand. Soldiers lost wrist guards, category. Handguard, level. Black iron, attributes. Defense +5, introduction. A handguard accidentally lost by an ordinary soldier. The equipment in Divine Domain was divided into several levels, starting from the lowest level whiteboard equipment. Further up were black iron, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, epic, legendary, and mythical. Generally speaking, whiteboard equipment, black iron equipment, and bronze equipment would only have basic attributes enhancement. Very few silver.grade items will have special attributes bonuses. And apart from the basic attributes that far exceeded ordinary equipment, gold.level and above equipment would definitely provide additional rare attributes. On the first day of the game, 70% of the players had no weapons in their hands. The remaining 30% of players with weapons were basically those with whiteboard equipment bought from the NPC shops for 2 bronze coins. Those basic attributes added were even more pitiful. And this black iron gauntlet, which was also a level .0 equipment, added a total of 5 points of defense attributes. If Bill were to equip this black iron gauntlet right now, his defense points would directly exceed that of the Meat Shield Knight, Ursa. The equipment drop rate in Divine Domain was extremely low in the early stage. The vast majority of the reason why McCrae and the others were able to drop black iron. Grade equipment from an elite monster was because they were the first team to challenge the adventure. Level Forest of Eternity, and they had killed the elite monsters first. Elite monsters' first kill drop rate of ordinary equipment would be much higher. This was also the reason why so many unions were so determined to be the first clear the bosses at all costs. Simon and the other two stared blankly at the black iron gauntlet in Bill's hand. For a moment, he was speechless. It actually dropped equipment on the first day. And it was a black iron weapon that was an entire level higher than the whiteboard equipment. Excited, Bill directly equipped the black iron gauntlets. Instantly, his wrist was no longer bare, but a worn leather wrist guard. 3 goblins, a total of 6 bronze coins. 1 wrist guard. I don't want the bronze coins. I'll take this wrist guard. Let's go. The boss is still far away. I'll go ahead and scout the way. Hurry up and follow. After saying that, Bill directly entered stealth mode and disappeared on the spot. Ursa, who was standing at the front, looked at Bill who had disappeared. He swung his round shield a few times in the air and said resentfully, "Greedy bandit, this guard should belong to McCrae." Simon and Meng Chi, who were standing beside McCrae, also frowned, feeling that Bill was a bit detestable. Simon collected the 6 bronze coins. After gesturing to Ursa and Meng Chi, he walked in front of McCrae and said, "McCrae, take these 6 bronze coins. We aren't as greedy as that damn thief." McCrae shook his head noncommittally and accepted the 6 bronze coins. To the 3 of them the few words of advice from McCrae just now was the most valuable gain they had in this dungeon. And in McCrae's eyes, this guard was just an extremely ordinary piece of trash black iron equipment. Even the experience, bronze coins, and rewards from the Eternal Forest dungeon. None of this attracted McCrae. McCrae's only purpose in joining this dungeon team was that hidden reward, the Deceiver necklace. Bronze, unique, and this hidden reward could only be obtained by the first one to clear the adventure level boss of the Eternal Forest dungeon, Gruel the Deceiver. Chapter 9. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gruel the Deceiver. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. After the battle, everyone apart from Bill all developed deep admiration for this mysterious and powerful healer player. Knight Ursa, who was walking in front, asked, "Brother, the block you just taught me is so good. Any other moves? Teach me again." Before McCrae could respond, Simon and Meng Chi, who had protected McCrae like a human wall, also asked, Yeah, bro, teach us." Looking at the expectant trio, McCrae smiled and said, "Actually, no matter what class it is, in the early stage of the game, the skills needed to be mastered are all the same. All you need to do is to coordinate your operation, look at the timing of the skill's release, and understand the mechanism of the skill's release. That's enough. It's really not that amazing, just practice more." With that, the 4 of them no longer cared about the disappearing Bill and walked forward. Along the way, some dark goblins appeared one after another. There were 1, 2, 3, and 4 at most. However, under the guidance of McCrae, everyone had already become a solid newbie player who had just entered the game. They still were constantly being attacked by monsters, but under the command of McCrae, even a team that was put together at the last minute also became more and more unified. As a result, their battle power also increased visibly. Along the way, the goblin monsters also dropped quite a lot of bronze coins for everyone, but equipment was never dropped again. However, the black iron handguards dropped by the goblin captain at the start could be said to be a good start, and it made Simon and the other 2 very enthusiastic. The deeper they walked into the Eternal Forest, the darker it became. At first, the surrounding trees could still be seen as green. At this point, they had completely turned black from the corrosion of the undying power. The atmosphere was especially oppressive. The four of them moved through the increasingly complex terrain of the forest with great difficulty. In the distance, there was a cliff with a few skulls, a sight that made one shiver. There were also a few black marks, probably blood that had yet to completely dry. At this moment, a mysterious old man wearing a worn-out hat appeared beside a big tree. The old man ignored McCrae and the others who appeared in front of him. He only took out the flute in his hand and concentrated on playing it. The sound of the flute went from bright and beautiful at the start to sad and sorrowful later on. The sharp sound of the flute echoed in the endless forest for a long time. Shi Meng and the other two who were walking in front stared at this old man who suddenly appeared with a strange flute. He stopped in his tracks. McCrae, who was standing at the back, took a few more steps back. He knew the real identity of this old man in front of him. The final boss of the Forest of Eternity, Gruul the Deceiver. His real appearance was an ugly dark goblin without half a face, and the appearance of this old man should be the human he had killed earlier within 3 days. Using the special ability of the Chain of the Deceiver, the monster was able to transform into the appearance of this dead old man. The old man leaning against the tree finished playing the tune. He slowly put down the flute and said with a hoarse voice, "Adventurers who have come far, I know your purpose for coming here. To eradicate the dark goblin. My purpose is the same. I was originally a guard captain of Greenland City, under orders to come here and kill these damn dark creatures, but the cunning dark goblin stole my weapon and hid in the darkness, making me lose my ability to fight them. Are you willing to lend me a suitable weapon?" With that said, the old man hit the big tree beside him with his withered arm angrily. As expected of the deceiver, Gruul. In his previous life, there were many naive players who didn't know the truth who had their equipment stolen by this cunning goblin. If he had given Gruul his equipment, Gruul would reveal his true form and humiliate these players who had been deceived by him in unbearable language. Moreover, when players fought with it, there would be a permanent debuff. A fool deceived by Gruul. Although there was no substantial weakening of attributes, it was extremely insulting. If the players didn't give Gruul any equipment, Gruul would directly transform into a boss in anger and fight the players. In the forest, Simon and the other two, who were standing by the roadside, looked at the old man who kept cursing the goblin. He wasn't far away, and they were a little hesitant whether to give him any equipment. McCrae didn't point it out. It was a good thing to teach a newbie a lesson. After all, there were many NPCs in the god's domain who cheated people like this. Bill, who couldn't find a way out after sneaking here, hid in the dark and looked at the 3 people. He couldn't help it anymore. After deactivating his stealth mode, he walked in front of the 3 people and urged, "Hurry up and give me any random equipment. Isn't it just lousy newbie equipment that costs 2 bronze coins? After the dungeon is done, I'll give you 2 bronze coins when you get out." Although Simon and the other 2 no longer had a good impression of Bill, they could go with that option for now. The honest and good-natured Meng Chi took out his beginner's short sword and handed it to Bill reluctantly. "Take it, I've just gotten a few bronze coins anyway." After getting the equipment, Bill scolded Meng Chi in his heart and said with a smile, "Don't worry, friend, I'll definitely return it to you." With that, Bill, who was holding the short sword, walked towards Gruul. This scene made McCrae, who was watching from afar, somewhat look forward to it. I wonder how Bill, the deceiver, would react after being cheated by a real deceiver. It'd be very interesting. Chapter 10. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Idiot Who Was Deceived by Gruul. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. In the forest, McCrae stood behind a huge rock with his arms crossed and a playful smile on his face. Meanwhile, Simon and the other 2, who were not far from Gruul, looked a little nervously at Bill, who was giving the short sword in his hand to the mysterious old man. Meng-Chi, especially. That was his short sword. Bill walked along the path and quickly arrived in front of Gruel. He bent slightly and presented the short sword to Gruel with both hands. He said respectfully, "Honorable guard, you are right. We are here to eliminate these detestable dark goblins. Take this short sword, and please help us eliminate these damn dark creatures." Behind Bill, Simon and the other two looked at Bill, whose expression was solemn and whose words were respectful. They didn't dare to believe that this was the petty person who only cared about profit. All of them were stunned. The old man picked up the short sword that Bill offered with both hands and carefully examined it. He put it away with great satisfaction and said happily, "Your sword is pretty good, but you're too stupid. You don't deserve to have such a sharp sword." Another fool was fooled by Gruel. Gruel is very happy now, so he wants to kill you. In an instant, the kind old man in front of everyone twisted and turned into a terrifying dark goblin with only half a face left and the other half white bones. System. Boss has been triggered, Deceiver Gruel system. Player Bill was added with debuff, idiot deceived by Gruel. When McCrae heard the system prompt from behind the huge rock, he, who was usually serious, actually couldn't help but laugh. Even Meng-Chi, who had lost his short sword, instantly burst into laughter after hearing this prompt. "Ha ha ha, a fool deceived by a monster, as expected of you, Bill." Bill looked at the ugly monster in front of him and the debuff halo on his body. He cursed angrily, and then entered stealth mode. But Gruel was no longer an ordinary monster. This was the final boss of the adventure.level forest, a boss.level monster. Its perception and aggro range were more than a level higher than ordinary monsters. Gruel's terrifying face forced out a smile uglier than crying. "Stupid thief, don't think of running, die." In an instant, Gruel was like an arrow that left the bow. With the short sword in his hand, he charged straight at Bill, who had already disappeared. Bill, who was in stealth mode, felt like a pair of sharp eyes were staring at his back. Cold sweat broke out on his back. "Oh no, my stealth has been broken." After locking on to Bill, Gruel waved the short sword in his hand and slashed accurately at Bill. A high damage number floated above Bill's head, 102. Damn it. Bill felt as if his whole back had been pierced, his health bar almost hit rock bottom in an instant. In an instant, he turned and jumped onto a big tree. The agility and jumping attributes of bandits exceeded other jobs. McCrae, who was hiding behind the huge rock, looked at Bill who was fleeing with his empty blood and thought to himself, on the first day of the server, the basic attributes added by the Black Iron grade are still very impressive, right? Otherwise, this attack by Gruel should be able to insta-kill a fragile class like bandits. On the other side, because Gruel had lost his first aggro target, he turned to look at Simon and the other two who were closest to him. With a short sword in hand, Gruel, who had lost his target, shouted angrily, "Damn humans! How dare you intrude into the territory of the Dark Goblin? Die!" Gruel let out a sharp roar, waved his short sword angrily, and slashed at Urser. Urser was standing at the front, and while he was shocked by the ugly Gruel, he was no longer a pure rookie who had just entered the game. Urser chanted madly in his heart. "Calm down. Calm down. Find the right opportunity. Steady." Just as the short sword in Gruel's hand was about to land on Urser's body, Urser suddenly raised the wooden shield in his hand. Bang! After the piercing sound of a collision rang out, Urser's shield was actually directly slashed into two by the goblin boss' short sword. Urser hurriedly rolled to dodge, escaping Gruel's next slash. When Simon, who was standing at the side, saw that Urser's situation was critical, he hurriedly raised his short sword and let out a challenge roar at Gruel. However, Gruel was unmoved at all and continued to chase after the fleeing Urser. McCrae, who was behind the boulder, shook his head. "No, after the boss slash is parried, its hatred points won't be transferred by low-level taunt skills in the short term. In McRae's eyes, Ursa, who was desperately trying to move and escape, was definitely dead. At this moment, Bill, who had drunk a health potion and was full of health, leaped down from the tree and shouted, "Don't be afraid. Attack together. Brother Knight. Keep moving." The two warriors continue to take turns using challenge roar to attract aggro. Steady. We must kill this boss. In Bill's eyes, Gruel was no longer a monster. Instead, he was a treasure chest emitting golden light, a body that held attractive equipment. With the relatively high dexterity of the bandit class, Bill moved quickly through the bushes, harassing the goblin boss that attacked Ursa from time to time. "Quickly heal the knight. Quickly heal." Bill hurriedly shouted at McRae, who had been hiding behind the huge rock.